Alright, so I don't know about the rest of you, but I've definitely noticed a distinct rise in the number of people talking about reparations for slavery in the last few months or so. I was thinking about this. I used to reject this idea just offhand as like, well, obviously we're not responsible for the actions of other people, for the achievements or the crimes or the accomplishments of other people. But that clearly wasn't working. That's not the tactical thing to do. I thought maybe I should be more empathetic. What would it really look like to have a conversation about reparations for slavery um, if you really accept this premise and take it to its logical conclusion? It's a legal question, so I'm going to try to approach it in a legal manner. Right off the bat, there's a common law tradition wherein you cannot be convicted of a crime that is defined after the fact. It is like if you um, live in a tent for 5 years or whatever, and then after you have done living with a tent and you've done something, you're doing something else, maybe you're living in an RV or something, and the government passes a law after that that says you are no longer allowed to live in a tent, you are not guilty of a crime that was defined as a crime after you committed it. So it makes it easier for people to not have to predict where the law is going in the future. It says, basically, oh well, you have to know the law, you have to understand the law, and you're responsible for knowing, understanding, and following the law. But it's not your job to mind read legislators of the future. That's how we can avoid this whole like wrong side of history argument bullshit, which is none of us can mind read. None of us knows what the future holds. None of us knows. We have to do the best we can with the moral knowledge that we have. Now, with slavery, it's an interesting thing because every civilizational, every civilization that could have slavery and that could capture people did. It's in the earliest documents. It's in the earliest stories that we have. Slavery was a universal part of human civilization. It was really only in 17th century where whites in Britain and France were like, nope, we've had enough. We have decided that slavery is a moral evil, rather arbitrarily, in fact. And they said, and will not only declare it to be evil, but we will go on a crusade all around the world to, at great expense to ourselves, economically and in human life, to free the slaves, to stop slavery as an institution, and to kill anybody who gets in our way. It began in England and France, spread to the rest of the West, including the United States. And the United States variation of this emancipation movement was one of the more bloody ones. Now, the Civil War wasn't originally about slavery. It almost started 50 years prior over some pretty pernicious tariffs and some Southern complaints about the way that tax money was being used by the North in an unfair manner, it wasn't being allocated properly, whatever. But at the time that it actually did happen in 1860, it kind of was about slavery. Even if we assume that at the higher levels of government for the North it wasn't. A lot of the volunteers for the Northern Army certainly were doing it in defense of their moral convictions and in opposition to slavery, which they thought to be an evil thing. So you have hundreds of thousands of white men sacrificing themselves and killing off other of their brethren, their countrymen, in some cases, their literal brothers, for this moral cause in defense of people who they have no social or familial bloodline ties to, that they'll never see, that might not even like, but they're doing it in defense of this moral conviction that they have. Strauss and Howe are two American historians who have come up with a generational theory that categorizes each generation into one of four archetypes. You have the heroes, you have the artists, you have the prophets, and you have the nomads. And this cycle was almost perfectly captures the entirety of American history, except for the Civil War. It skips a generation. An entire generation of white men were lost in defense of this conviction for something that wasn't a crime. They made it into a crime in this process. And at great, as we've said before, economic and human cost to themselves. And this sacrifice, this credit, in the technical sense of the word, seems to be missing from the conversation about reparations for slavery. So, while we're talking about collective responsibility, now my ancestors were not on either side of the Civil War. They were off in Europe doing European things. And as it happens, the people who captured and enslaved the Africans in the first place were not Americans either, for the most part. They were blacks and whites on the west coast of Africa. Now, if these people want to go and hunt down the bloodline descendants of those slavers, I'll support them, sure. And by support, I mean cheer them on from the side. I'll keep my money to myself, thank you. But if they want to do that, that's fine. America, again, taking on this common law notion of not being responsible for crimes prior to them being defined as crimes, didn't do anything illegal in that process. So, if we accept collective responsibility and we want to talk about slavery reparations, I think something's owed to whites. I never received a white privilege check, but I would be happy to start whenever you would like.